This video is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for legal advice. An eviction is something that has a major effect on a tenant's current living situation, but also often creates challenges for future living options. Renters should make every effort to avoid an eviction. However, if you are facing an eviction, it is important to understand your rights and responsibilities. An eviction is when your landlord forces you to move out of your home. The most common grounds for an eviction is a violation of the lease agreement, such as failure to pay rent. Other common violations are damages to the rental home and disturbing neighbors. If at all possible, it is generally in the best interest of the landlord and the tenant to avoid the eviction process. It can be expensive and time-consuming for both parties. So, if the possibility of an eviction arises, trying to solve the problem outside of court is the best solution. For instance, if you know that you'll be unable to pay rent for the month, try to work out an agreement with your landlord so that you can either pay the rent in installments or when you do have the money. While every situation is unique, it is important for the tenant to follow through on the plan they make with their landlord. If all other efforts have failed, eviction may be a necessary step. However, eviction is a legal process and requires both the landlord and the tenant to take specific steps in the process. Generally, the eviction process is as follows. First, the landlord tells the tenant they want the tenant to move out by a certain date. Second, the landlord files a case in court against the tenant. Third, the tenant receives notice of the lawsuit by mail or the sheriff. Finally, the tenant and landlord go to court. The hearing is to decide if the tenant has violated the lease. If the judge finds the tenant to be in violation of their lease, the tenant must move out by the specified date, often soon after the trial. If the judge decides the tenant has not violated their lease, the tenant does not have to move out. A renter with an eviction on their record will find this makes it difficult to find a landlord who will rent to them. So, it is important to consider strategies to find housing. One strategy is to be upfront about your eviction. For some tenants, their eviction was a result of a one-time, unavoidable situation, such as a divorce or serious medical condition. If you can provide documentation of the situation, some landlords may be willing to overlook the eviction. Another strategy is to increase the security deposit. A larger security deposit or rent paid up front can also sometimes help landlords feel more comfortable renting to a tenant with a prior eviction. Tenants can volunteer to pay an additional deposit as a way to be proactive. A third strategy is to provide good landlord references. Tenants with good references may have a better argument to present to a potential landlord. The references can explain to a landlord if the eviction was a one-time mistake and is not a consistent part of the tenant's character. A tenant can also pursue the expungement, which means the legal erasure of their eviction from their record. This process most often involves the settling of debt with the previous landlord, filing forms, receipts, and the landlord's written consent for the expungement with the county court. If this process goes through, the tenant should also attempt to clear their record with credit agencies such as TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, but this is not guaranteed. Eviction is something to avoid, if at all possible. If you are facing an eviction, it is important to know your rights as a renter. For information and legal assistance in the face of an eviction, go to indianalegalservices.org. This video is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for legal advice. Housing for Hoosiers is a service of South Central Indiana Housing Opportunities. SCIHO is dedicated to expanding housing options for low and moderate income households in South Central Indiana. For more great resources for renters, landlords, and property managers, visit us at housingforhoosiers.org.